Britain has stopped sharing intelligence with the United States about suspected drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean. The move follows growing concern over the legality of the Trump administration's lethal strikes on suspected drug smugglers. The Times reports that the UK agrees with the UN, which says those attacks are illegal. Bronwen Maddox is director of the Chatham House think tank. Bronwen, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So tell us what has been going on in terms of the US administration's action and why it was that the UK thought, actually, we can't support this anymore.
Well, the US has been bringing increasing military force, including big naval vessels and small naval vessels, to attack boats it says are being used by drug runners around the Caribbean. And the contest is whether this is legal or not, because they are going in many cases, simply to kill these people. And the UK has very quietly, but it has surfaced in the past couple of days, partly thanks to the Times, has said we are concerned that this is illegal and we don't want to be involved. So we are going to step aside in the Caribbean from our normally extensive and rock-solid intelligence sharing operation with the US, one of our closest allies, and we're just not going to help in it because we don't want to be accused of being complicit in what may be illegal action.
What has prompted this ramping up of action then from the United States? Because there had previously been quite a lot of cooperation between the US and the UK. I think it was September last year, the Royal Navy intercepted this sort of narco sub, seized £160 million worth of cocaine. That was a operation with the US. Why have the US amplified and accelerated their action in so sort of aggressively in the last few months?
There has been a flood of drugs into the US. Yes, it goes up and down, and these volumes are very large, but it is something the Trump administration has been particularly concerned about. They also are no friends of some of the governments involved, or not involved, but that they believe are not stopping this drug flow. And so they have chosen to ramp this up and have really very aggressively taken the action that I was describing with a stopping at sea of some of these vessels. And the UK has had some months to consider what to do about this, but has got increasingly uneasy.
We are friends with the US. You know, that so-called special relationship is much talked about. How damaging is it for the UK to say to the US, actually, sort of, we've reached a threshold of which we're not prepared to cross?
Do you know, we're in a very hard, realistic world. So even using the word friends these days in what is a very transactional world is not necessary, if I can put it that way. So I think the UK, in a way, can say, look, we don't agree with that bit. We are still very much your allies. We want to cooperate in lots and lots of things. But in a funny way, President Trump's transactionalism opens it up for others to respond in the same way. Now, he can get hurt and piqued by that in turn. And so it's not without risk for the UK to take this step. But I think we're seeing many countries and continents try and find new ways of dealing with the US, and just explore whether, as the UK is now doing, you can side with it on many things, maintain a good personal relationship with President Trump, but say we're not with you on that particular bit.
When they weighed up the risks, what do you think they are in terms of repercussions or retaliation from Donald Trump?
The point is you don't know. So there are all kinds of things at stake. There is the wider military intelligence cooperation. There is the US's continual, but under President Trump, rather edgy support for NATO. There is, though, the big trade relationship that the UK wants to have with the US, still not fleshed out, or where it is fleshed out, those are the parts that are rather to the US's advantage. And there are many, many things in there that the UK still wants, whether it's the steel industry or car exports or whatever. So all of this can be jeopardized by one thing that the administration takes amiss. But I think it's a sign of how strongly the UK feels about this, and how strongly it feels that it has to protect its own reputation and legality, that it has taken this step.
Yeah, I think the US is Britain's closest intelligence sharing partner. Clearly, we're quite dependent then on US information. it sounds as though if this did happen about a month ago and we only know about that now, at this point, the UK saying we're going to withhold that information hasn't engineered a material consequence coming back the other way.
I think that's right. You never know whether that will happen or whether it will get stacked up along with other things. But we've seen various points where the UK, and Keir Starmer has led this, has been able to depart from what the US most wanted. For example, over Diego Garcia, the US didn't particularly want the UK to hand those islands back to, or hand them to Mauritius. It didn't want the UK to recognise Palestine as a state. So there have been some areas where the UK has managed to operate independently of what the US most wanted, but there's a limit, and I think there is a sense in which someone in the White House, perhaps the top person, is running a calculator all the time over all these and working out whether it's tolerable or not.
At what point, the odds become stacked the other way. Bronwen, thank you. Bronwen Maddox, director of the Chatham House think tank. I'm reminded of that press conference where Donald Trump and Keir Starmer stood next to each other, and some of those very obvious international differences were laid out exactly over recognising Palestine, for example, by the journalists. And the two managed to disagree politely enough for the purpose of that press conference. But yes, as Bronwen says, this is one of many sort of international disputes where we have a slightly different stance from the US.
Yes, I mean, in terms of Donald Trump standing alongside other world leaders, Keir Starmer has done particularly well, hasn't he? It's like everybody's marriage of dreams by comparison to the experience that some other people have
Absolutely.
had.
The High Commissioner of Human Rights, Roger Turk, when talking about the U.S. strikes in Caribbean and Pacific, he said these actions violate international human rights law and it's unacceptable. Does the Secretary General share the same statement with the High Commissioner?
He does. The Secretary General, as I said, echoes what Mr. Volker said, what the High Commissioner said, that in what people say are operations to counter illicit drug trafficking, they must adhere to international standards, including limits on the lethal use of force. It's clear to us at the UN, I think we've been very upfront about it, that issues regarding organized crime, regarding the illicit drug trade, is a serious threat to member states and communities worldwide. Combating it requires international cooperation, as well as innovative public policies to address the root causes of the violence and the drug addiction. This is the analysis that our Mr. Turk's office has developed, and we fully back it.
Does the Secretary General believe that such actions violate the UN Charter?
Any action by member states need to fully respect the Charter.